I pulled into the gravel parking area beside the ranger station, my headlights cutting across the weathered wooden building that would serve as my base for the next 8 hours. The engine ticked as it cooled, and I grabbed my gear bag from the passenger seat, feeling that familiar mix of nerves and excitement that came with starting a new job. Eric Thompson was already waiting for me on the front steps, checking something on his clipboard. Even in the dim light from the station's porch lamp, I could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of too many long nights in these woods. He looked up as I approached, giving me a nod that was professional, but not particularly warm. "Right on time," he said, glancing at his watch. "Good. Punctuality matters out here more than you might think." The station's interior was exactly what I'd expected from a remote outpost. Functional furniture, maps covering most of the wall space, and equipment cabinets lined up along the back wall. Eric moved with practiced efficiency, pulling items from various shelves and setting them on the central desk. "Radio first," he said, holding up a handheld unit that looked like it had seen better decades. "Range is sketchy in some areas, but it'll get through when you need it. Battery lasts about 12 hours if you're not chattering constantly." I clipped it to my belt, testing the weight. Standard issue stuff, nothing I hadn't used before. Eric continued laying out gear: flashlight, emergency kit, clipboard with patrol sheets. His movements had the automatic quality of someone who'd done this briefing countless times, but I noticed him checking each item twice, like he was making sure nothing got forgotten. "Your route tonight covers the main forest road and 3 marked trails," he said, unfolding a laminated map and pointing to highlighted sections. "Stick to these paths. Don't take shortcuts. Don't explore interesting side routes, and definitely don't go wandering off trail because you think you saw something worth investigating." The way he said it made me glance up from the map. His expression had shifted from routine instruction to something more serious. "There's things in these woods that come out after dark," Eric continued, meeting my eyes directly. "Most of the time they keep to themselves, but sometimes they don't. You might see deer that look wrong, too tall, joints that bend the wrong way, faces that aren't quite right. We call them not deer." I kept my expression neutral, but internally I was already categorizing this as the kind of local folklore every remote job seemed to come with. Bigfoot sightings, ghost stories, whatever helped veteran employees feel important when training the new guy. Eric must have read something in my face because his tone became even more direct. "I know how that sounds. Every new ranger thinks it's bullshit until they see one for themselves, but humor me and follow 3 simple rules." He held up fingers as he counted. 1. Stay on the marked trails I just showed you. 2. If you see anything that seems off or wrong, ignore it and keep moving. Don't investigate. Don't get curious, just note the location and keep going. 3. If anyone approaches you asking for help or directions, do not assist them. Be polite, but don't give them information and don't follow them anywhere. The 3rd rule caught my attention more than the creature warnings. "People get lost out here regularly?" "People ask for help regularly," Eric corrected. "Whether they're actually lost is another question entirely." He handed me the truck keys, and I noticed his fingers were slightly trembling. Not from cold, the station was warm enough, but from something else. Stress, maybe, or just fatigue from too many night shifts. "Radio check-ins every 2 hours, he said. "If I don't hear from you on schedule, I'm coming to find you. Don't make me do that unless you absolutely have to." Eric gathered his own gear and headed toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. When he turned back, the professional mask had slipped enough for me to see genuine concern underneath. "Look, David, I know you've got outdoor experience, and I know this job probably seems straightforward, but people have disappeared in these woods. Not lost and found 3 days later with a good story. Disappeared completely. The Forest Service doesn't advertise that fact because it's bad for tourism, but it's real." I stood up from where I'd been reviewing the patrol route, trying to project confidence I mostly felt. "I appreciate the warnings, Eric, really. but I've spent plenty of time in remote areas, and I've dealt with wildlife and confused hikers before. Whatever the forest throws at me tonight, I can handle it." Eric studied my face for a long moment, then shrugged. "Maybe you can. I hope you're right." He stepped outside, leaving me alone with the equipment checklist and the quiet hum of the station's heating system. Through the window, I watched his truck's taillights disappear around the first bend in the forest road. I looked down at the radio in my hand, then at the map with its highlighted patrol routes, and felt that familiar confidence settling in. Strange creatures in the woods, people who weren't really lost, disappearances that defied explanation. It all sounded like the kind of stories that grew with each telling around ranger station coffee pots. I'd handled black bears, mountain lions, and plenty of genuinely dangerous situations in my previous work. Whatever Eric was worried about, I was pretty sure my experience and common sense would see me through it. The truck's headlights carved through the darkness ahead of me as I navigated the winding forest road, checking off waypoints on Eric's patrol route. 30 minutes in, and the job felt routine enough. Just me, the steady hum of the engine, and miles of empty asphalt cutting through dense pine forest. I rounded a bend near marker 7 when my headlights caught movement on the shoulder ahead. A figure stepped into view, waving one arm to get my attention. A woman, walking alone on a road that led nowhere but deeper into the forest. I slowed the truck and rolled down my window as she approached. She looked to be in her 30s, with shoulder-length brown hair and a face that carried the kind of worry you'd expect from someone genuinely in trouble. Her jeans and light jacket appeared clean, almost spotless, which struck me as odd for someone wandering around out here. "Thank God," she said, hurrying to my window. "I've been walking for hours. I'm looking for Crystal Lake. My husband went camping there 3 days ago, and I haven't heard from him since." I shifted the truck into park and pulled out the laminated map Eric had given me, spreading it across the steering wheel. Crystal Lake. I traced the marked trails with my finger, checking each labeled body of water in our sector. "I'm not seeing any Crystal Lake on this map," I said, looking up at her. "What area was he heading to when he left?" Her face tightened with frustration. "It has to be there. I drove him there myself last month, but I can't remember exactly how we got there. The roads all look the same in the dark." I pulled out my GPS unit and scrolled through the local database, searching for any lake with Crystal in the name. Nothing came up within a 50-mile radius. The woman, she'd introduced herself as Sarah, watched me work with growing agitation. "He's been out there for 3 days without any contact," she continued. "His phone goes straight to voicemail, and he was supposed to check in yesterday morning. Something's wrong." I noticed she was shifting her weight from foot to foot, and that's when I caught it. She was wearing only one shoe. Her left foot had a brown leather shoe, expensive looking, but her right foot was bare except for a white sock that was somehow still clean despite her claims of walking for hours. "Where's your other shoe?" I asked. Sarah glanced down as if she'd forgotten, then looked back up with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I lost it somewhere back there. Stepped in a creek and it got pulled off. That's the least of my worries right now." Her clothes showed no signs of creek water. No mud, no dampness, no wrinkled fabric. Even her sock looked like she'd just put it on. I folded the map and set it aside, feeling the first stirrings of the unease Eric had warned me about. But she seemed genuinely distressed about her husband, and I'd dealt with plenty of panicked family members during search and rescue operations before. "Look, I can't point you to Crystal Lake because I don't think it exists in this area," I said. "But if your husband is camping somewhere around here, the Eastern Trail system would be your best bet. Most of the established campsites are in that direction." I gestured vaguely toward the forest on the far side of the road, keeping my directions intentionally general. Eric's voice echoed in my head. "Don't give them information. Don't follow them anywhere." But I couldn't just leave someone's wife stranded on an empty road in the middle of nowhere. "Eastern Trails," Sarah repeated like she was memorizing the words. How far? Maybe 2 miles down this road, then you'll see trail markers. But honestly, you should wait until morning to go looking. It's not safe to wander around out there in the dark. Sarah's expression shifted then, and she smiled. It wasn't the relieved smile I'd expected, or even the grateful smile of someone who'd just received help. It was something else entirely. Too wide, too knowing, like she was amused by something I wasn't aware of. "Thank you," she said. "That's exactly what I needed to know." She stepped back from the truck and walked toward the tree line without another word. I watched her move between the pines, her white sock bright against the dark ground until the forest swallowed her completely. I sat there for a long moment, engine idling, trying to shake the feeling that something about the whole interaction had been wrong. Not just the missing shoe or the clean clothes, but something in the way she'd responded to my directions, like she'd gotten what she came for. Eric's warnings came back to me with uncomfortable clarity. If anyone approaches you asking for help or directions, do not assist them. Be polite, but don't give them information and don't follow them anywhere. I put the truck in gear and continued down the patrol route, but I couldn't stop checking my rearview mirror. The road behind me stayed empty, but I kept thinking about that smile and the way Sarah had vanished into the darkness like she belonged there. The patrol route took me deeper into the forest, winding through sections where the pine trees pressed closer to the road and my headlights barely penetrated the darkness between their trunks. I'd been driving for about an hour since my encounter with Sarah, but I couldn't shake the memory of that final smile she'd given me before disappearing into the trees. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as I navigated another sharp curve. The whole interaction kept replaying in my mind. Her spotless clothes, the missing shoe, the way she'd said, "That's exactly what I needed to know," like I'd just passed some kind of test. Eric's warnings echoed louder now than they had back at the station. The truck's headlights swept across the trail ahead as I rounded marker 12, and something caught my eye on the gravel shoulder. I slowed down and pulled closer, letting the beams illuminate a single brown leather shoe sitting in the middle of the path. I stopped the truck and grabbed my flashlight, leaving the engine running as I walked over to examine it. The shoe was expensive looking, with a low heel and quality leather that showed minimal wear. It matched perfectly with the one Sarah had been wearing on her left foot. My stomach dropped as I crouched down beside it. The shoe was positioned too neatly, placed rather than dropped or lost. No scuff marks, no dirt inside despite sitting on a gravel trail, and the leather still held that polished look of something recently cared for. I pulled out my radio and tried raising Eric. "Base, this is David. I need to report a potential evidence discovery." Static filled the channel, punctuated by what sounded like fragments of Eric's voice, but nothing intelligible came through. I adjusted the frequency and tried again, getting the same interference that made communication impossible. Following standard procedure, I photographed the shoe from multiple angles with my camera, then used the GPS unit to mark its exact coordinates. The device showed my location clearly enough, but when I tried to radio the information to Eric, the static only got worse. I bagged the shoe as potential evidence and loaded it into the truck, then continued along the patrol route. The forest felt different now, wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The usual sounds of nighttime wildlife had vanished completely. No owl calls, no rustling in the underbrush, no small animals scurrying away from my headlights. Just silence so complete it made my ears ring. The radio crackled occasionally with what might have been Eric trying to reach me, but the fragments were too broken to understand. I caught what sounded like, "Don't," and later, "Get back," but nothing coherent enough to act on. My decision to help Sarah felt increasingly stupid with each mile I drove. Eric had been explicit about not assisting anyone who approached for help, and I'd ignored that rule within 2 hours of starting my shift. The missing shoe, the clean clothes, the non-existent lake she'd been so insistent about finding. All of it pointed to something far stranger than a worried wife looking for her husband. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might be moving. Every gap in the radio static sounded like it could be hiding a voice trying to warn me about something. The isolation was getting to me in a way it never had before, making me question every decision I'd made since leaving the station. I pushed the accelerator harder, eager to complete the remaining waypoints and get back to the ranger station where I could get clear radio reception and report what I'd found. The patrol route suddenly felt endless, each marker taking longer to reach than it should have. The shoe sat in its evidence bag on the passenger seat, a tangible reminder that whatever was happening in these woods tonight was far beyond anything Eric had prepared me for. I needed to get back to base, needed to talk to someone who understood what I was dealing with, needed to stop feeling like I was driving deeper into a trap with every mile. The patrol route stretched endlessly ahead of me, each mile feeling heavier than the last. 2 hours into my shift, and the radio static had become a constant companion, punctuated by fragments of Eric's voice that I couldn't piece together into anything useful. The evidence bag with Sarah's shoe sat on the passenger seat like an accusation, reminding me how badly I'd already screwed up my first night. My headlights swept across another bend in the forest road, illuminating the dense wall of pines that pressed against both shoulders. The silence outside the truck felt unnatural, not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping forest, but something deeper and more deliberate. Even with the engine running and the heater humming, I could feel that absence of sound like a physical weight. Movement caught my eye near the tree line ahead, just beyond the sharp curve. My headlights picked up what looked like a deer grazing beside the trail, its body partially hidden behind a cluster of low-hanging branches. I eased off the gas, letting the truck slow naturally as I approached. Deer were common enough out here, and I'd learned to give them space rather than spook them into running across my path. But as I got closer, something about the animal's posture struck me as wrong. It stood too still, too rigid, like a statue someone had placed among the trees. When my headlights hit it full on, I could see its legs clearly for the first time. The things supporting its body were impossibly long and thin, like someone had stretched a normal deer's limbs beyond any reasonable proportion. The joints bent in directions that made my stomach turn, elbows that curved backward, knees that seemed to fold sideways. The legs looked brittle, fragile, but they held the creature's weight without any sign of strain. I brought the truck to a crawl, maybe 15 feet away from whatever this thing was. It hadn't moved since I'd first spotted it, hadn't even twitched an ear or flicked its tail the way real deer did when they sensed a vehicle approaching. The unnatural stillness made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. Then it lifted its head. The neck stretched upward in a smooth, continuous motion that went on far longer than it should have, up and up, until the creature's head hung at least 8 feet above the ground, swaying slightly like a snake preparing to strike. Where a deer's gentle face should have been, I found myself looking at something that belonged in a nightmare. The mouth gaped open in a perfect black circle, revealing rows of what looked unmistakably like human teeth. Not the flat, grinding teeth of an herbivore, but sharp, pointed incisors and canines that caught my headlight beams and reflected them back like polished bone. The thing had no visible nose or muzzle, just that horrible circular opening that seemed to lead into nothing but darkness. Its eyes fixed on me then, large, glassy orbs that reflected my headlights with an unnatural shine, like mirrors designed to catch and hold light in ways that normal eyes couldn't. The pupils were perfect black circles surrounded by irises that seemed to shift and move even as I watched, changing from brown to green to colors I couldn't name. Eric's voice came back to me with sudden clarity. Not deer. Deer that look wrong. Heights off. Joints bend the wrong way. Face looks unnatural. This was exactly what he'd been trying to warn me about. Not some local folklore or hazing ritual for new rangers, but something real and standing 15 feet away from my truck, watching me with those impossible eyes. I remembered his instructions. Ignore anything that seemed off. Note the location, but continue without investigation. Don't stop. Don't get curious. Just keep moving and report it later. My foot found the gas pedal, and I pressed down just enough to get the truck rolling again. Slow, steady, no sudden movements that might provoke whatever this thing was into doing something worse than just staring. The creature's head rotated to track my movement, turning with a fluid motion that no real animal could manage. A full 180 degrees without the body shifting at all. As I drew level with it, those glassy eyes never left mine. The black mouth remained open, and I caught a glimpse of something moving in the darkness beyond the teeth. A tongue, maybe, or something worse that I didn't want to identify. The thing's breath fogged in the cool air, proving it was alive despite looking like some kind of twisted sculpture. I kept the truck moving at a steady crawl, fighting every instinct that told me to floor the accelerator and get out of there as fast as possible. Eric had been specific about not making sudden movements, and I trusted his experience more than my own panic. The moment I passed the creature, I checked my rearview mirror. The knot deer stood motionless for a few seconds, then stepped deliberately into the road behind me. Its movements were wrong, too fluid, too coordinated for something with legs that bent in impossible directions. It positioned itself directly in the center of the asphalt and remained there, a dark silhouette against the faint reflection of my taillights. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator without any conscious decision on my part. The truck picked up speed, carrying me away from whatever that thing was and deeper into the forest patrol route. Every few seconds, I glanced at the mirror, expecting to see empty road behind me. But the creature stayed there, standing in the exact spot where it had first stepped onto the asphalt. Even as the distance grew between us, even as the curve of the road should have hidden it from view, I could still make out that impossible silhouette watching me leave. I forced myself to look forward, to focus on the road ahead instead of whatever was following my truck with its gaze. The radio crackled with more static, and I thought I heard Eric's voice trying to break through, but the interference made communication impossible. The forest felt different now. Not just quiet, but actively hostile in a way I'd never experienced before. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might be hiding another creature with 2 long legs and human teeth. Every gap in the canopy seemed designed to let something watch me pass. I dismissed Eric's warnings as folklore, but there was nothing mythical about what I'd just seen. The thing standing in my rearview mirror was real, solid, and utterly wrong in ways that made my skin crawl. Whatever was happening in these woods went far beyond anything my outdoor experience had prepared me for. The speedometer climbed as I pushed the truck harder than necessary, desperate to put distance between myself and the knot deer. I fought the urge to look back again, knowing that seeing it still standing there would only make things worse. The patrol route climbed steadily through a series of switchbacks, carrying me higher into the hills, where the pine trees thinned slightly and gaps appeared in the canopy overhead. My hands hadn't stopped shaking since the knot deer encounter, and I kept checking the rearview mirror even though logic told me that thing was miles behind me. 20 minutes of driving through the oppressive silence had done nothing to calm my nerves. Every shadow between the trees looked wrong. Every bend in the road felt like it might reveal another creature with impossible limbs and human teeth. The evidence bag containing Sarah's shoe sat on the passenger seat like a weight, reminding me how completely I'd ignored every warning Eric had given me. As the truck crested a rocky outcrop that offered a clear view across the valley below, I grabbed the radio and tried calling base again. The static that had plagued me all night suddenly cleared, replaced by the blessed sound of clean reception. "Base, this is David. Eric, are you there?" "David!" Eric's voice came through immediately, sharp with concern. "I've been trying to reach you for over an hour. Your signal was breaking up completely. What's your status?" I pulled the truck to a stop at the overlook and took a breath, trying to organize the events of the last few hours into something coherent. The forest spread out below me in the darkness, an endless expanse of trees that suddenly looked more threatening than peaceful. "Eric, I need to report 2 incidents. First, about an hour and a half ago, I encountered a woman on the road near Marker 7. She said her name was Sarah, and claimed she was looking for her husband at something called Crystal Lake. The radio went quiet for several seconds. When Eric responded, his voice had taken on the same serious tone he'd used during the briefing at the station. "Tell me exactly what happened." "Everything she said, everything you observed." I described the encounter in detail: Sarah's clean clothes, the missing shoe, her story about a husband camping at a non-existent lake, the way she'd smiled when I gave her directions toward the eastern trails. Eric listened without interrupting, but I could feel his tension even through the radio static. "And the second incident?" he asked when I finished. "About 20 minutes ago, I saw one of those things you warned me about. The not deer." My voice caught slightly on the words. "It was standing beside the trail near marker 12. Legs that bent wrong, neck that stretched too high, and its face—" I stopped, not wanting to relive the image of that circular mouth full of human teeth. "Jesus Christ, David." Eric's professional calm cracked for a moment. "You engaged with her, didn't you? The woman. You gave her information." I tried to help. She seemed genuinely worried about her husband, and I thought, "You thought wrong." Eric's interruption was sharp but not angry, more like a teacher correcting a dangerous mistake. "David, that woman wasn't human. What you encountered was exactly what I tried to warn you about. These things mimic people to lure victims deeper into the forest, away from the main roads where we can't find them." My stomach dropped as his words sank in. I thought back to Sarah's too clean clothes, her evasive answers about Crystal Lake, the way she'd disappeared into the forest without hesitation. The missing shoe that I'd found so neatly placed on the trail, like someone had positioned it exactly where I'd be sure to notice. "The shoe I found," I said slowly. "She planted it there, didn't she?" "Most likely. It's evidence designed to create confusion, make you second-guess what you saw, lead you off the established patrol routes to investigate further. These entities are smart, David. They study human behavior and use our instincts against us." I reached over and touched the evidence bag, feeling like an idiot for treating it as legitimate physical evidence when it was actually bait in some kind of trap I'd barely understood. "The not deer you saw confirms it," Eric continued. "They work together sometimes. The mimic draws you in, gets you thinking about missing people and mysterious evidence. Then the other creatures move into position. Seeing one means there are probably others nearby. The forest around me suddenly felt alive with hidden threats. Every dark gap between the trees could be hiding something with two long legs and predator's teeth. Every rustle of wind through the branches might be covering the sound of something moving closer to my position. "Eric, what am I supposed to do? I'm still out here on patrol." "Get back to the main roads immediately. Forget the rest of your route. Head directly for the ranger station. These things become more active when they know someone's been marked, and you giving that woman directions means you're definitely on their radar now." I started the truck and began turning around on the narrow overlook, my hands clumsy on the steering wheel. The confidence I'd felt at the beginning of my shift had evaporated completely, replaced by the humbling realization that I'd walked straight into dangers I'd dismissed as folklore. "Eric, how long has this been going on? You said people have disappeared." His voice grew heavier over the radio. "Years, maybe decades. The Forest Service doesn't acknowledge it officially because it would destroy tourism, but we've lost hikers, campers, and 3 rangers in the past 5 years alone. Not lost like they wandered off and couldn't find their way back. Lost like they were never here at all." I finished my turn and started back down the mountain road, driving faster than I probably should have, but needing to put distance between myself and whatever might be moving through the trees around me. The radio crackled with static as I lost elevation, but Eric's voice remained clear enough to understand. "I tried to prepare you for this, David. The rules I gave you aren't suggestions or hazing rituals. They're survival protocols developed through experience. People who ignore them don't usually get a second chance. I understand that now." The words felt inadequate for how completely wrong I'd been about everything. I thought you were just trying to spook the new guy with local ghost stories. I wish they were just stories. But what you saw tonight was real, and it was hunting. The fact that you're still alive and talking to me means you got lucky, not that you handled it correctly. The truck's headlights swept across the familiar curves of the road as I retraced my route toward the station. Every shadow looked potentially hostile now. Every bend in the asphalt felt like it might reveal another creature waiting to test my reactions. How do I know what's real anymore? I asked. If they can mimic people perfectly, if they can make evidence appear where it shouldn't be, how do I tell the difference? Experience, training, and following the protocols no matter how ridiculous they seem. Eric's voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned these lessons the hard way. The rules exist because they work, David. People who follow them survive. People who think they know better end up missing. I checked my speedometer and realized I was pushing the truck harder than necessary, my foot heavy on the accelerator as fear translated into urgency. The forest pressed close on both sides of the road, and I found myself leaning forward in my seat, trying to see farther ahead into the darkness. Eric, are you going to recommend I be transferred? Because I understand if... We'll talk about that when you get back to the station safely. Right now, just focus on driving and stay on the radio. If anything else happens, if you see anything that doesn't look right, call me immediately. The radio began crackling with static again as I descended farther into the valley, but Eric's final transmission came through clearly. And David, don't stop for anything. I pulled the truck into the gravel parking area beside the ranger station, my body aching from the tension I'd carried for the past hour. My hands were still unsteady as I turned off the engine, the radio conversation with Eric replaying in my mind like a warning I should have heeded from the beginning. The station looked exactly as I'd left it hours ago, but everything felt different now. What had seemed like a routine assignment when Eric handed me the keys now felt like stepping into a hunting ground where I was decidedly the prey. I grabbed my flashlight and the evidence bag containing Sarah's shoe, then stepped out into the cool night air. The silence hit me immediately. No insects, no wind through the trees, no distant owl calls. Just that same unnatural quiet that had followed me through most of my patrol. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked toward the station's front door, keys ready to unlock it for my scheduled break. Movement near the building's corner caught my eye. A figure stood in the shadows at the edge of the structure, barely visible in the darkness beyond the station's single exterior light. My stomach dropped as I raised my flashlight and clicked it on. Sarah stood there, still wearing the same light jacket and jeans from our encounter hours earlier. She stepped into the beam of my flashlight with that same worried expression, raising one hand to shield her eyes from the glare. "Oh, thank God you're back," she said, moving toward me with evident relief. "I've been waiting here for over an hour. I still can't find Crystal Lake, and I was hoping you might have other maps or suggestions that could help." Every warning Eric had given me crashed through my thoughts at once. The radio conversation from the Overlook echoed in my ears. That woman wasn't human. These things mimic people to lure victims. They study human behavior and use our instincts against us. I kept the flashlight beam trained on her face and took a step back toward my truck. "What are you doing here? I gave you directions to the eastern trails hours ago. Why aren't you following them?" Sarah's expression flickered for just a moment, like someone trying to remember lines from a script. "I tried going that way, but I got turned around in the dark. All these forest roads look the same, and I ended up back here somehow." "How did you find the ranger station?" I pressed, my hand moving instinctively toward the service weapon on my belt. "This building isn't marked on any public maps. It's not visible from the main road." I just kept walking until I saw the light. Her voice carried less conviction now, the worried wife act starting to crack around the edges. "I've been walking for hours, and when I saw this place, I thought maybe you could help me find a different route to the lake." I swept the flashlight beam down toward her feet and felt my blood turn cold. She wasn't wearing any shoes at all. No expensive brown leather shoe on her left foot, no sock on her right, just bare feet that showed no signs of the hours of walking she claimed to have done. No cuts, no dirt, no evidence of contact with gravel or forest debris. "Where are your shoes?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as possible. Sarah looked down as if noticing for the first time, then back up at me with that same unreadable expression I remembered from our first encounter. "I lost them in the woods. The terrain is rougher than I expected." The lie was so obvious it made my skin crawl. I'd found one of her shoes positioned perfectly on the trail at marker 12, placed exactly where I couldn't miss it. Now she was claiming to have lost both shoes wandering through terrain that would have left her feet bloody and damaged if she'd actually been walking barefoot for hours. My fingers closed around the grip of my service weapon, and I drew it smoothly from the holster. "Sit down on the ground. Now." The transformation in Sarah's demeanor was immediate and unsettling. The worried expression vanished completely, replaced by something unnaturally calm and alert. She didn't look surprised or frightened by the weapon pointed at her. She looked interested, like she was studying my reaction to see what I would do next. Without any protest or questions, she lowered herself to the gravel in a smooth, controlled movement that seemed too precise for someone genuinely scared or confused. She settled into a sitting position and folded her hands in her lap, then looked up at me with those same eyes that had watched me give her directions hours earlier. "That's better," she said quietly, and her voice carried no trace of the desperate worry she'd been projecting moments before. I kept the weapon trained on her while reaching for my radio with my other hand. The calm compliance was more disturbing than any resistance would have been. Real people didn't react to drawn weapons by becoming serene and still. "Base, this is David. I need immediate assistance at the ranger station. I have a suspicious individual in custody who may be connected to the incidents I reported earlier." Eric's voice came through the radio immediately, sharp with urgency. "David, describe the situation. Are you safe?" "The woman from my earlier encounter is here at the station. She claims to be looking for help, but her story doesn't add up, and she's exhibiting behavior consistent with your warnings about mimics." Static crackled for a moment before Eric responded. "I'm 20 minutes out. Do not let her leave your sight, and do not follow her if she tries to move. Keep your distance and stay alert. If that's what I think it is, it's testing you to see how you'll react." Sarah continued sitting motionless on the gravel, her hands folded, her expression peaceful and patient. She hadn't asked why I'd drawn my weapon, hadn't demanded to know what I thought she'd done wrong, hadn't shown any of the normal human responses to being held at gunpoint by someone she'd asked for help. The silence stretched between us as I waited for Eric's arrival, my flashlight beam keeping her illuminated while my weapon remained steady. Whatever this thing was, it seemed content to wait and watch, like it had all the time in the world to see what I would do next. 20 minutes felt like an eternity with something that looked human but wasn't sitting 10 feet away from me, studying my every move with eyes that reflected my flashlight beam just a little too brightly in the darkness. The 15 minutes that followed stretched like hours. I kept my weapon trained on Sarah while she sat motionless on the gravel, her hands folded in her lap with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. My flashlight beam never wavered from her face, illuminating those two bright eyes that watched me with unsettling calm. She didn't fidget, didn't shift her weight or adjust her position. Real people couldn't sit that still for that long, especially with a gun pointed at them. Her breathing remained steady and quiet, visible only as small puffs of condensation in the cool air. Everything about her stillness felt calculated rather than natural. My arm began to ache from holding the weapon steady, but I didn't dare lower it or look away. Eric's warnings played on repeat in my mind. These things studied human behavior, used our instincts against us, waited for moments of weakness to exploit. I'd already made enough mistakes tonight by helping her in the first place. The radio crackled with static on my belt, and I heard what sounded like Eric's voice trying to break through. I needed to check for an update on his arrival time, but looking away from Sarah felt like the exact kind of opening she might be waiting for. The static cleared for a moment, and Eric's voice came through more clearly. I glanced down at the radio for just a second to adjust the volume, keeping Sarah in my peripheral vision. "David, I'm about 5 minutes out. Maintain your position and..." When I looked back up, the gravel where Sarah had been sitting was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs as I swept the flashlight beam across the area where she'd been. No movement, no sound of footsteps on gravel, no sign of which direction she might have gone. The woman had simply vanished without making even the slightest noise. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know you're here somewhere." I pivoted in a slow circle, keeping the weapon ready while scanning the shadows around the station building. The single exterior light created a small pool of illumination, but beyond its reach, the darkness was absolute. She could be anywhere, behind the building, crouched next to my truck, watching me from the tree line 20 feet away. My flashlight beam caught something near the station's front steps that made my stomach drop. 2 women's shoes sat side by side on the concrete, arranged with the precision of items carefully placed rather than dropped. One was the brown leather shoe I'd found on the trail and bagged as evidence. The other was identical, the matching shoe that should have been on Sarah's left foot during our first encounter. I approached the steps slowly, weapon still drawn, and examined the shoes with my flashlight. Both were clean and polished, showing no signs of wear or contact with forest debris. They sat perfectly parallel to each other, positioned exactly where someone entering the station would be certain to notice them. The evidence bag from my truck was nowhere to be seen. Sarah had somehow retrieved the shoe I'd collected, removed it from a sealed evidence container, and arranged both shoes here while I watched her sit motionless on the gravel. "Eric," I called into the radio. "She's gone. The suspect has disappeared from my location. I'm searching the immediate area." Static answered me, followed by fragments of Eric's voice too broken to understand. The clear reception I'd had moments earlier was gone, replaced by the same interference that had plagued me throughout the night. I expanded my search perimeter beyond the station's immediate vicinity, moving in careful circles while keeping the building in sight. The flashlight beam swept across the gravel parking area, the edge of the forest, the narrow service road leading back to the main route. Nothing moved in the darkness, and no footprints marked the soft earth around the trees. After covering the immediate area twice without finding any trace of where Sarah had gone, I made the decision to widen my search further. Whatever that thing was, it had been studying me, testing my reactions, and I couldn't let it escape to report back to others of its kind or set another trap. I headed toward the tree line where the service road met the forest, calling Eric's name into the radio every few steps. The static grew worse as I moved away from the station, and his responses became completely unintelligible. The familiar trail that connected the ranger station to the main patrol route stretched ahead of me, clearly marked and well-maintained. I'd driven this section dozens of times during training and walked it on foot just yesterday during my orientation. But something about it looked different now. The trail curved left where I remembered it going straight. The wooden trail markers I expected to see were missing, replaced by metal signs I didn't recognize. Even the trees seemed arranged differently, denser and more imposing than they'd been hours earlier. I pulled out my GPS unit and checked my coordinates. The device showed me moving steadily away from the station, but the readings kept shifting. One moment, it displayed my location as 50 yards northeast of the building. The next, it showed me a quarter-mile southwest. The satellite signal fluctuated between strong and non-existent. The forest pressed closer around me as I continued following what should have been a familiar path. The trail branched in directions I didn't remember, offering routes that seemed to lead deeper into areas I'd never seen before. Landmarks, I expected. The lightning-split oak tree, the small creek crossing, the rocky outcrop that served as a waypoint, had simply vanished. I tried retracing my steps back toward the station, but the path behind me looked as unfamiliar as the route ahead. Every direction I turned led to terrain that didn't match my mental map of the area. The GPS continued providing contradictory information, and my flashlight beam revealed only more forest that grew stranger with each step. The silence was absolute now. No wind through the branches, no small animals moving through the underbrush, no distant sounds of traffic from the main road that should have been less than a mile away. My own breathing and footsteps sounded unnaturally loud in the dead air. I stopped walking and forced myself to think clearly about my situation. The ranger station couldn't be more than a few hundred yards from my current position, but I'd somehow lost all sense of direction in terrain I thought I knew well. The trails led to places that didn't exist. My equipment was providing false readings, and the forest itself felt fundamentally wrong. 20 minutes of searching had turned into complete disorientation. I was lost in an area where getting lost should have been impossible. Walking in circles while something that looked human but wasn't remained somewhere in the darkness around me. The radio crackled with more static, and I thought I heard Eric calling my name, but his voice sounded distant and distorted. I tried responding, but wasn't certain if my transmissions were getting through. I was completely alone in a forest that no longer followed the rules of normal geography, carrying a weapon that felt useless against threats I didn't understand, growing more desperate with each failed attempt to find my way back to safety. I turned around again, trying to find any landmark that made sense, when the rumble of an engine broke through the unnatural silence. My head snapped toward the sound as headlights cut through the trees, bouncing and weaving along what looked like a completely different trail than the one I'd been following. The vehicle was moving fast, too fast for the rough terrain, and I could hear branches scraping against metal as it pushed through sections where the forest had grown too close to whatever path it was taking. I raised my flashlight and waved it back and forth, hoping whoever was driving would see the beam. Eric's truck burst through a gap between two large pines, headlights sweeping across the area where I stood. Relief flooded through me as I recognized both the vehicle and the silhouette behind the wheel. I started jogging toward the truck, but Eric's voice cut through the night before I could call out to him. "David, get down now!" The urgency in his tone made me drop to a crouch without questioning why. I heard movement behind me, something large pushing through the underbrush with deliberate, measured steps. I turned my flashlight toward the sound and immediately wished I hadn't. Another knot deer emerged from behind a massive pine tree, but this one made the creature I'd encountered earlier look almost normal by comparison. It stood at least 10 feet tall on what appeared to be 6 legs arranged in 2 rows along its body. Each leg bent and twisted at impossible angles, some facing forward while others pointed sideways or backward, creating a spider-like stance that should have made movement impossible. The thing's head hung at the end of a neck that curved and twisted like a snake, positioning itself directly above me despite the creature's body being several feet away. As I watched, the head began to split down the middle with a wet, tearing sound that made my stomach lurch. The split widened to reveal not one mouth, but 3 separate openings, each lined with rows of teeth that looked like they'd been pulled from different animals. Human molars mixed with sharp canine fangs and serrated edges that belonged to no creature I'd ever seen. All 3 mouths moved independently, opening and closing in a rhythm that reminded me of breathing. Eric's truck engine roared as he gunned it toward my position. "David, move!" I scrambled toward the truck as Eric swung the passenger door open from inside. The knot deer's twisted head tracked my movement, all 3 mouths opening wider to emit a sound that was part growl, part clicking, and part something else I couldn't identify. I dove through the open door, and Eric hit the gas before I'd even gotten my legs inside. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the loose forest floor as we accelerated away from the creature. I twisted around to look through the rear window and saw it standing motionless where I'd been moments before, its multiple heads now facing our direction. The thing didn't chase us. It just watched with what looked like satisfaction, as if our escape had been exactly what it expected to happen. "What the hell was that?" I managed to ask as Eric navigated through trees that seemed to part just enough to let the truck pass. "The cleanup crew," Eric said grimly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. They send those when someone's been marked for collection. You were being herded toward it. The forest around us began to look more familiar as we drove, the twisted geography that had confused me earlier gradually giving way to terrain I recognized from my training. Within minutes, I could see the ranger station's exterior light through the trees ahead. Herded? I asked. Eric pulled into the station's parking area and killed the engine. The whole thing was a setup, David. The woman, the shoe you found, the trail that led you in circles. It was all designed to get you lost and confused enough that you'd walk right into that thing's territory. I thought about the shoes positioned perfectly on the station steps, the GPS readings that kept changing, the familiar trail that had somehow led to places that didn't exist. The shoes were bait. Exactly. They create spatial distortions around items like that. Anyone who picks one up or tries to follow the trail becomes disoriented. Your sense of direction gets scrambled, familiar landmarks disappear, and you end up walking in patterns that lead exactly where they want you to go. We sat in the truck for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. I could see the two shoes still sitting on the station steps through the windshield, perfectly arranged and waiting for the next person to notice them. "How many rangers have you lost to this?" I asked. Eric's expression darkened. 3 in the past 5 years, all experienced guys who thought they could handle whatever the forest threw at them. They found shoes or other objects, tried to investigate, and walked into areas where the normal rules don't apply anymore. I remembered my confidence from just hours earlier, the way I dismissed Eric's warnings as folklore and hazing. The realization of how completely I'd been manipulated made me feel sick. Every choice I'd made tonight, helping Sarah, following the trail, searching for her when she disappeared, had been exactly what that thing wanted me to do. They never came back, never found so much as a footprint. It's like they stepped off the face of the earth. Eric looked at me with an expression that mixed relief and exhaustion. I've been monitoring radio chatter all night, waiting for the signs. When your signal started breaking up in patterns I recognized, I knew you were in active contact with something that wasn't human. The pieces clicked together in my mind. Eric hadn't just been waiting at the station for me to return. He'd been tracking my situation, ready to intervene the moment it escalated beyond what I could handle on my own. You were expecting this to happen. I was hoping it wouldn't, but yeah, these things test every new ranger to see if our protocols hold up. Tonight you got the full treatment. Mimic, false evidence, spatial distortion, and a collector waiting at the end of the maze. Eric rubbed his face with both hands. You survived because you followed enough of the rules to buy me time to reach you. I stared at the shoes on the station steps, understanding now that they weren't evidence of anything except my own gullibility. The brown leather looked expensive and well-maintained, exactly the kind of detail designed to make someone like me think they'd discovered something important. What happens to the shoes now? We leave them exactly where they are until morning, then dispose of them following very specific procedures. Touching them again would just restart the whole process. Eric opened his door and stepped out of the truck. Come on, we need to get inside and file a report on tonight's encounter. I followed him toward the station, giving the shoes a wide berth as we climbed the steps. The familiar interior felt like a sanctuary after hours of navigating a forest that had been actively trying to kill me. Eric settled behind his desk and pulled out a thick logbook I hadn't noticed during my orientation. Every supernatural encounter gets documented. Names, times, descriptions, outcomes. The Forest Service doesn't officially acknowledge any of it, but we keep records anyway. As he began writing, I realized how lucky I'd been. Not just lucky. Eric's intervention had been perfectly timed because he understood exactly what he was dealing with. Without his experience and preparation, I would have become another disappearance that never got explained. Thank you, I said quietly. Eric looked up from the logbook and nodded. Just remember this feeling the next time you think you know better than the protocols. These things have been refining their tactics for longer than either of us has been alive. Arrogance gets people killed out here. The scratching of Eric's pen against paper filled the station as he documented the night's events. I watched him write with the methodical precision of someone who had done this too many times before, his hand moving steadily across the page while he recorded details that would never appear in any official report. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving me drained and shaky as I sat in the chair across from his desk. My uniform was wrinkled and damp with sweat, and I could still feel the phantom weight of the service weapon in my hand. The memory of that creature's multiple mouths opening and closing in unnatural rhythm made my stomach turn. Eric finished writing and set the pen down, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. The honest answer felt strange after hours of trying to project confidence I didn't actually possess. Everything I thought I knew about this job just got turned upside down. He nodded and stood up, moving toward a metal cabinet in the corner of the room. From inside, he pulled out a pair of thick rubber gloves and what looked like specialized tongs designed for handling hazardous materials. "I need to collect those shoes before someone else finds them," he said, pulling on the gloves with practiced efficiency. "Want to watch the procedure? You'll need to know this if you're staying." I followed him outside, keeping a respectful distance as he approached the steps where the shoes sat in their perfect arrangement. Eric used the tongs to carefully lift each shoe, examining them from multiple angles before placing them in separate sealed containers he'd brought from the station. His movements were deliberate and cautious, like someone handling live explosives. "The material itself isn't dangerous," he explained as he worked. "But these things carry what we call psychic residue. Physical contact reactivates the spatial distortions and marks you for another collection attempt." I watched him seal the containers and label them with the date and location details. The process looked clinical and routine, but I understood now that every step had been developed through hard experience, and probably some losses along the way. "What happens to them after this?" "They get shipped to a facility that specializes in disposal of anomalous objects, same place we send anything else we can't explain through normal channels." Eric stripped off the gloves and tucked them into a disposal bag. "The Forest Service has arrangements with certain organizations that handle this kind of thing quietly." Back inside the station, Eric settled into his chair and opened a different logbook, this one thicker and more worn than the first. The pages were filled with handwritten entries dating back years, each one documenting encounters that sounded like something out of a horror novel. "Our forest is a hotspot," he said, flipping through pages of reports. "Something about the geography here creates conditions these entities find attractive. We get more supernatural activity in a single month than most ranger districts see in a decade." I leaned forward to get a better look at the entries. Names, dates, descriptions of creatures that defied explanation. Outcomes ranging from successful evasion to presumed lost filled page after page. The handwriting changed occasionally, indicating different rangers had contributed to the record over time. "How long has this been going on?" "Officially? Never. Unofficially, there are reports going back to the 1940s when this area first became a state forest." Eric turned to a section near the front of the book and showed me a faded entry written in different ink. Early rangers documented strange disappearances and unusual wildlife, but they didn't have the framework we have now for understanding what they were dealing with. The weight of that history settled over me as I read through entries describing incidents remarkably similar to what I'd experienced tonight. Rangers encountering people who asked for help but didn't behave like real humans. Objects placed strategically to create confusion and lead people off established trails. Creatures that mimicked familiar animals but violated every natural law. The woman I met, Sarah, she wasn't human at all, was she? Eric shook his head. Probably a construct. These entities can create temporary physical forms that look and sound human, but they're basically biological puppets designed to manipulate our social instincts. They study human behavior and use our natural desire to help people against us. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Every moment of my interaction with Sarah had been calculated manipulation. Her worried expression, her story about the missing husband, even her clothes and missing shoe had been carefully chosen details meant to trigger my protective instincts and override my training. "How do you live with this?" I asked. "Knowing that anyone you meet out there might not be real?" Eric was quiet for a long moment, staring at the logbook with an expression that looked exhausted. "Some days I'm not sure I can anymore. This job takes a psychological toll that nobody prepares you for. You start questioning everything, trusting nothing, always looking for signs that the person in front of you isn't what they appear to be." He closed the logbook and rubbed his face with both hands. "I've been thinking about requesting a transfer. Find a nice, normal forest where the biggest threat is a confused black bear or an illegal campfire. Somewhere I can sleep through the night without wondering what's prowling around outside." The thought of Eric leaving made my chest tighten with panic. He was the only reason I'd survived tonight, the only person who understood the true nature of the threats we faced. Without his experience and knowledge, the next new ranger would walk into the same traps I had, except they might not be lucky enough to have someone watching their back. "You can't leave," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. Eric looked at me with surprise. "David, you've been here one night. You have no idea what this job really entails." "You're right, I don't. But I know that my arrogance and skepticism almost got me killed tonight, and that would have happened to anyone else they send here." I leaned forward in my chair, meeting his eyes directly. "How many new rangers have you trained? How many of them survived their first month because you taught them the protocols that keep people alive?" "Most of them, but then you can't leave. Those protocols exist because you developed them through experience. You've turned this nightmare posting into something survivable, and if you walk away, all that knowledge goes with you." Eric studied my face for a long moment, probably looking for signs that I was just another naive recruit who didn't understand what he was asking. Training new rangers to survive this place is getting harder every year. These entities adapt their tactics, learn from failed attempts, become more sophisticated in their approaches. What worked 5 years ago doesn't necessarily work now. Then teach me everything you know. Let me help carry that burden instead of trying to handle it alone. I thought about the creature with multiple mouths, the maze-like trail that had led me in circles, the complete disorientation I'd felt when familiar terrain became alien. I understand now that survival out here depends on respecting realities I can't fully comprehend. I'll follow every protocol without question and ask for training on anything I don't understand. Eric was quiet again, weighing my words against whatever doubts he carried about the job and the responsibility of keeping people alive in an environment that actively hunted them. The decision would affect not just our professional relationship, but potentially the safety of every future ranger assigned to this district. "If I stay, you work under close supervision for at least 6 months, he said finally. "No solo patrols, no independent decisions about suspicious encounters, no deviations from established procedures regardless of how minor they seem. You do exactly what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it, until I'm confident you can recognize and avoid these threats without getting yourself killed." "Agreed. And if I determine at any point that you're not adapting to the realities of this job or that your presence is creating additional risk, I'll recommend your immediate transfer to a different district." "I understand." Eric nodded slowly. "The night shift isn't over yet. We still have 4 hours until dawn, and these things don't stop hunting just because we've had one encounter. You ready to continue with proper backup this time?" I stood up and checked my equipment, making sure everything was secure and functional. The radio, the flashlight, the service weapon that had felt useless against threats that violated natural law. All of it would be necessary for whatever remained of the shift, but now I understood they were tools to be used within a framework of knowledge and experience rather than replacements for proper caution. "I'm ready." Eric closed the logbooks and locked them back in the metal cabinet, then gathered the sealed containers holding the shoes. The evidence would be processed and disposed of according to procedures I was only beginning to understand, but it no longer represented a mystery I needed to solve. As we prepared to resume the patrol, I realized that the ranger who had started this shift no longer existed. The confident, dismissive attitude I'd carried into the forest had been replaced by humility and respect for dangers I couldn't see coming. The real education in supernatural forest management was just beginning, and my survival would depend on accepting that some threats required faith in protocols rather than understanding of their underlying mechanisms. The forest was still hunting, and we were still prey, but now I had a guide who understood the rules of engagement. That knowledge felt more valuable than any weapon I could carry.